Hey, so we are back. I just finished baking cookies for another video, and while I'm waiting for them to cool so I can bag them up and bring them to my brother-in-law for his birthday, I decided I would read a chapter. My apartment's quite warm from the stove, so if I seem a little anyway. Chapter 10. Oh, a spooky shack. That's right. Yeah, I'm curious about the spooky shack. Hmm. Instinctively, Nancy pressed down hard on the gas pedal and shot past the man. In the rearview mirror, she saw an astonished look on his face. She slowed to a normal pace and laughed in relief. A hitchhiker. He probably thinks I'm crazy. The stranger did not in the least resemble a criminal type. He looked kind and pleasant. Better safe than sorry, Bess defended herself as they left the amazed hitchhiker far behind. Correct, Bess. You should not pick up hitchhikers, no matter how kind and pleasant they look. I'll have to agree with you on that, said George. Presently, Nancy came to a fork in the road and stopped the convertible. There were no signs to indicate which road led toward the Weston factory. I turned to the left, Bess advised. The right-hand turn looks more likely to me, George insisted. Look, I see a shack over among those trees. Why not inquire there? A good idea, Nancy approved. She pulled up before the shack and flung open the car door. George did the same and promptly stepped out, but Bess held back. No telling who lives there, girls. Maybe that criminal. Right. I would not go to a mysterious random shack in the woods to ask for directions. You should go, if you really need to ask for directions, if your GPS isn't working on your phone or you can't Google it, then a gas station would be a good place to ask, or a business. You don't want to go like a cafe or a McDonald's. You don't want to go to a random stranger's house. Bad news bears. All right. George and I will go, said Nancy. You stay here, Bess. Not on your life. If you're going, I'll go too. George and Nancy were already pushing their way through the brush, and Bess, fearful of being left alone, hurried after them. The shack was located in a tiny clearing which was enclosed on three sides by dense forest. The girls were halfway to the cabin when Bess clutched Nancy's arm. There's someone in the bushes, over by the grape arbor, watching us. Well, you are three strangers approaching a spooky shack. The three girls huddled together, afraid to continue. They could see the motionless figure peeping out at them. Suddenly, Nancy burst into laughter. A scarecrow! She exclaimed. Bess, this makes the second time you've given us a scare. Bess looked sheepish and made no response. Come on, George said in disgust. We're acting like babies. The girls approached the shack with a boldness they did not feel. Bess remarked nervously that the place seemed unnaturally quiet. Summoning her courage, Nancy knocked on the door. There was no response. She knocked again, louder than before. I heard someone moving, George whispered tensely. Nancy thought she had heard something. A little chill of excitement ran down her spine. Was someone hiding inside? Let's go back, Bess urged fearfully. One more try, Nancy begged and knocked again. When no answer came, Nancy gently turned the knob. The door opened so quickly she almost plunged headlong into the one-room shack. She sprang back, expecting to face an occupant. The room was empty. The few furnishings were broken down and covered with dust. Another joke on us, Nancy said. I'd have sworn I heard someone moving in here. So would I, murmured Bess in relieved tone. What a creepy place. The girls tiptoed around the shack, sidestepping the dirt and ducking their heads as they avoided the heavy cobwebs. Nobody home, announced Nancy, gaily shaking off her former apprehensive mood. No one has used this shack in months, George declared. So you should never go in abandoned shacks like that. You don't know who's in there. You don't know what's in there. You don't know whose property. It could be trespassing. I mean, you might get poked with a rusty nail, tetanus. You have to get a shot. You're supposed to get tetanus shot every 10 years anyway, I think. We may as well run along, said Nancy. Returning to their car, the girls agreed after some debate to take the right-hand fork. A few minutes' driving took them to the foot of Sunview Mountain. I see a town ahead, Nancy observed. We'll stop there and inquire if we're on the right road. When they reached the main section of the village, Nancy managed to track the attention of a policeman, who left his post and came over to the car. "The road to the Weston factory," he repeated. "You should have taken the left fork several miles back." The girls exchanged looks of consternation. After their recent experiences, the thought of returning over the same route was cheerless indeed. "There's another way you can get there," the policeman told them, "but it will take you a little longer." "That's all right," Nancy said thankfully. He then explained in detail how they could reach the factory. Nancy thanked him and drove on. "We'll have to hurry," she remarked to her friends, "or the factory will be closed. Just our luck to take the wrong turn." A policeman is a safe person to ask for directions. Swift driving partially made up for lost time, but Nancy's wristwatch warned her that it was nearly 4 o'clock when they at last reached the factory on the outskirts of Stanford. It took the girls a few minutes to locate the office. Nancy presented herself to the young woman in charge, stating that she wished to see Mr. Baylor Weston. "It's rather late," the secretary informed Nancy with a superior air. "Mr. Weston doesn't like to make appointments after 3 o'clock." "We've driven here from River Heights," Nancy explained patiently. "Please give him my name." The young woman vanished into an inner office. The girl sat down on a bench to wait. 5 minutes passed. "Looks as if we're out of luck," George grumbled. "The man probably suspects what we came for and means to get out of it if he possibly can." She lowered her voice, for at that moment the secretary returned. "Mr. Weston will see you," she told Nancy. "Step into his office, please." If Nancy and the other girls expected to meet a defiant Baylor Weston, they were mistaken. His every movement disclosed that he was as intensely nervous as he had been the day of the accident. Mr. Weston recognized Nancy, and it was not necessary for her to state her mission. Evidently, her visit had been anticipated. He motioned the girls to be seated, and still without speaking, the manufacturer reached for the bills which Nancy held in her hand. He glanced at them, and a look of relief came over his face. "Well, that's not half bad," he remarked, relaxing. "I was sure it'd be much more." Nancy expected Mr. Weston to mention his insurance company's paying the amount, but instead he opened his desk drawer and took out a checkbook. As he wrote in it, he said, "I'm decidedly pleased that the total expense is so small. Last time I crashed into a car, it cost me real money, to say nothing of the threatened lawsuit." "The last time?" Nancy echoed with a smile. "I'm very nervous, excitable," the manufacturer reiterated. "Doctor's right. I shouldn't drive a car." He handed the check to Nancy. "That covers everything." "Yes, and thank you. I hope you have no more accidents." "So do I," Baylor Weston returned with a grimace. "But very likely I shall, unless I get a chauffeur." That's an idea. I'll make a note of it." So a chauffeur is somebody who drives people around. Like when I drive you guys on field trips, I'm your chauffeur. He reached for a pad and, to the amusement of the girls, scribbled down the memorandum. "By the way," he remarked, "did you hear how much Raybolt lost in the fire?" "I don't believe the loss has been estimated," Nancy replied. "Mrs. Raybolt visited the ruins today. She was quite overcome." "The Raybolts always did hate to lose a penny," the manufacturer grunted. "It wasn't that," Nancy told him. "Mrs. Raybolt declares her husband was in the house at the time of the fire. She believes he was burned to death." Baylor Weston shook his head doubtfully. "Can't make me believe that Felix Raybolt was caught in that fire. He's too foxy for that. If he has disappeared, you may wager it was for a purpose." "Mrs. Raybolt's grief seemed to be genuine," Nancy commented. "No doubt. Raybolt wasn't the fellow to confide in his wife about anything. He kept his own counsel." "You knew him well." "At one time. We broke off business relations years ago. Raybolt was too tricky, mean and unfair in all his dealings. He'd steal ideas without a qualm." "So I've heard," Nancy returned dryly. "By the way," she asked, "do you have a man by the name of Joe Swenson working for you?" Mr. Weston thought for a moment, then said, "The name's not familiar to me, but I'll inquire of our personnel office." He called the manager. After a few moments' pause, the answer came back, "No." Nancy was disappointed. She thanked Mr. Weston, and the three girls arose. They left the factory and walked to the car. "Let's take the longer route back to River Heights rather than the Sunview Mountain Road," Bess pleaded, and Nancy consented. As she reached the Weston plant's main gate at the highway, the girls saw that traffic had become heavy. "Everyone must be coming to town for the carnival," George observed. "I saw the posters advertising it when we drove through Stanford. There's to be some sort of parade, too." The steady stream of vehicles held the convertible at the entrance of the factory grounds. While the girls were impatiently waiting for a break in the line, the plant whistle blew. Now there will be a jam, Nancy exclaimed. A moment later, she finally managed to turn to the highway, but the cars in front of her moved slowly. Again, Nancy was forced to halt. The blowing of the whistle had released hundreds of workmen. They came pouring from the plant. While she waited for the car ahead to move, Nancy watched the men with interest. Suddenly, a vaguely familiar figure caught her eye. At first, Nancy thought she must be mistaken, but as the man turned his face toward her, she knew her first impression had been correct. Look, Nancy cried excitedly. There's the man I saw running away from the fire. He's Joe Swenson. Oh, that's the end of that chapter, guys. And we're also now halfway through this book, so we're going to have to see what happens next. You can see we're halfway. Very, very curious. So the shack was just a shack. Man, I've been hoping for something a little spookier, but oh well. I'll take it because we're back on the trail. So I'll see you tomorrow